Hello and welcome to this week's edition of the Glasgow Times News Podcast, normally recorded in our studio at the Bishopbriggs Media Centre, currently recorded from our volunteers' homes. To keep in touch with us, use our social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram and Twitter, which are all at Q and Review. That's CUEANDREVIEW. Or get in touch via information@qandreview.com. That's information at CUEANDREVIEW.com. Please like and share our podcast and give us any constructive feedback.
Evening Times, June 16. Lifestyle. Glasgow Shakespeare Festival Bard in the Botanics returns for new season. Report by Anne Fotheringham. Jennifer Dick was part of the very first Bard in the Botanics, Glasgow's celebrated outdoor Shakespeare festival, playing Caliban in The Tempest. More than 20 years on, she has the role of Ariel in the same play. She smiles. There is something about the full circle about that. I have been very lucky to have been with the company ever since my first ever season. I have acted and directed, and am now Associate Director of the festival. I'd like to say yes, that was always the plan, but I didn't even study Shakespeare at school, so I had no understanding academically of the plays, and I only discovered them when I saw them performed. I'm quite glad about that in a way. I find the plays endlessly interesting, because of the richness of the writing, the way they stand up to reinvention, the universal humanity in them. Maybe I wouldn't have felt like that if I had come to them in a different way. Originally from Dundee, Jennifer moved to Glasgow in 2000 and never left. And she says, I love Glasgow. A friend once said to me that if you fall over on the street in London, people will just walk on by. If you fall over in Glasgow, people will help you. They'll laugh at you, but they will always help you. It's such a friendly and exciting city. Performing is in her blood, and she adds, my parents met at drama school. My dad went on to be a voiceover artist, and they both instilled in me a love of acting. I was 17 when I first directed a play. I wanted to add another string to my bow because everyone knows acting is such an insecure profession. The 2022 season of Bard in the Botanics kicks off on June 22 and runs until July 30. In addition to acting in The Tempest, Jennifer is directing a new version of evergreen favourite A Midsummer Night's Dream, the first time the festival has staged it in more than a decade. Says Jennifer with relief. After all the cancellations of 2022 and the restrictions of 2021, it is so exciting to be back at full steam. A Midsummer Night's Dream is so full of joy. And I think what our version is about is that idea of giving yourself permission to take up space in the world. There is a lot going on in the world at the moment, much of it deeply upsetting. So if we can make people smile and feel better about themselves, then that's a step towards people feeling capable of making the world a better place. That's a lofty aim, of course, but I believe it is true. The opening show in the Kibble Palace, June 23 to July 9, is the festival's first foray into Greek tragedy and the culmination of 3 years' planning. Gordon Barr will direct a new version of Euripides' Medea, written by playwright Cathy McKean and devised specifically for acclaimed actor Nicole Cooper. Gordon explains, We are delighted to be returning to the Kibble Palace for this year's season with productions that showcase the dramatic talent of one of Bard's longtime core artists, Nicole Cooper, working with Cathy McKean, whose version of Medea has been conceived not only for the Kibble but especially for Nicole, is a tremendous pleasure. The second half of the season, July 14 to 30, sees Cooper make her directorial debut with a new production of The Tempest, staged in the Kibble Palace and featuring Alan Steele as Prospero. A new production of Gordon Barr's groundbreaking take on Much Ado About Nothing, the original rom-com with a twist, completes the 2022 lineup. Jennifer adds, Nicole's version of The Tempest looks at Prospero and Miranda's relationship when they are older, away from the island, and he is giving up his magic. It is a really beautiful piece. It's about coming to terms with age and how people deal with the emotions surrounding parents getting older, starting to lose their faculties. It is very emotional, and I think it will resonate with many people. Tickets for Bard in the Botanics, Antique Fables and Fairy Toys season go on sale soon and will be available via www.bardinthebotanics.co.uk. Report by Anne Fotheringham.
From the Glasgow Times, Friday the 17th of June 2022, from the news section. Glasgow to host largest summit on cost of living crisis, by Nicole Mitchell and Neil Puran. Glasgow will host a summit on the cost of living crisis, which has been described as the largest of its kind in Scotland. Trade unions and poverty campaigners have organised a summit on Friday to call for the Scottish Government to go further in tackling the issue. Headed by the Scottish Trade Unions Congress, STUC, and the Poverty Alliance, the summit will bring together more than 40 civic organisations. They will develop a joint platform on how to tackle the crisis. STUC General Secretary Ross Foyer said, "Poverty is a political choice. The pandemic has exposed the deep-rooted inequalities across Scotland, exacerbated by a cost of living crisis not of workers' choice nor making. We cannot and will not be held responsible for the negligence of our political class in their failures to tackle the rising inflation coupled with falling wages." This summit, the largest seen in Scotland on this crisis, calls for the Scottish Government to go further, using the powers of the Parliament to mitigate this emergency. The recent spending review plans to voice harmful cuts in our public services is utterly incompatible with the response needed to help those impacted by this crisis. She continued, "Whilst the UK Government are still firmly within our sights, and we will be front and centre at the national demonstration outside Westminster Parliament this Saturday, we will be unrelenting and unapologetic in our resistance to this crisis until further action is taken." Peter Kelly, Director of the Poverty Alliance, said, "The only way we can make lasting change when it comes to poverty is through cooperation and solidarity. By bringing together trade unions and voluntary community groups, we want to build a movement that puts compassion and justice at the heart of public life in our communities, in Holyrood and in Westminster." In the articles by Nicole Mitchell and Neil Puran. From the Glasgow Times, Friday the 17th of June 2022, from the news section. Glasgow woman heartbroken after ill pup from dodgy breeder dies hours later. An exclusive by Lauren Brownlee. The buyer of an adorable puppy who died hours after being sold by a suspected dodgy breeder has spoken out about her heartbreaking experience. Labrador Minnie was tragically put to sleep the day after she was purchased by a loving new owner for £750. The following day, on June 14th, 3 pups from the same litter were found abandoned in Renfrew, as previously reported by us. The Glasgow woman, who was excited for the pup to settle in with her kitten, has asked not to be identified. She spent more than £1,250 on vet bills to try to save the pup, and has shared her horrific ordeal in order to raise awareness of potential black market breeders. The woman, who asked all the relevant questions and made sure the pup came with proof of vaccination and microchipped, was given an address to meet the breeder in Greenock at 1:30pm on June the 12th. She said, "When I got there, he said he would come outside and get me as his house was tricky to find. He walked out with a bitch I believed to be the mum, as she had clearly given birth some time ago, along with 2 puppies we were interested in under his arms. The vaccination document I received was forged and was linked to a legitimate vet practice in Northern Ireland, so I'm hoping someone can be traced and held responsible for this." The puppies that were found in Renfrew were taken into the care of the Scottish SPCA, who discovered their microchip was from the same batch as Minnie's. The woman revealed that Minnie began to vomit just 20 minutes after she collected her. She added, "She had bloody diarrhoea and was also very thin. I called the emergency vet hospital and took her straight away. They suspected she may have been infectious and kept her in isolation whilst receiving treatment. A test for parvovirus returned a positive result, and she also tested positive for intestinal parasites. We had given her 24 hours to improve, but unfortunately she was too far gone, and it was kinder for her to be put to sleep. She spent most of her time with me asleep. It breaks my heart. I was so excited for her to meet my kitten and for them to grow up together. I was, and still am, equally heartbroken and furious, but it was the kindest thing for her. I hope she saw there were kinder people in the world than the evil she was born into." The seller of the dog blocked the woman from contacting him after she raised concerns about the pup's health and requested her money back. He had initially given multiple excuses as to why he couldn't provide a refund. The Scottish SPCA were informed of the pup's death by the woman immediately. She was later told about the microchip numbers of the dump puppies in Renfrew being linked to Minnie's. She said, "I was very upset, but I feel relieved that someone found them and they are now in safe hands. Please, if you are considering a puppy and something does not seem right, report them to the SSPCA immediately." This man seemed very convincing, even in person. He told me what food she was eating and told me to boil chicken to settle her stomach, which, in hindsight, tells me he knew the litter were unwell. Anyone with information is asked to contact 03000 999 999. And that article was an exclusive by Lauren Brownlee. From the Glasgow Times, Friday the 17th of June 2022, from the news section. Man smashed up an East End takeaway after being kicked out of a Shettleston pub. This article is an exclusive by Catriona Stewart. A man smashed up an East End takeaway after being kicked out of a nearby pub. Glasgow Sheriff Court was told this week how, on January the 20th, 2022, around 10pm, Stephen Gilhooly was asked to leave a bar he had spent the evening in. The 36-year-old then turned up at the Tandoori Hut in Shettleston Road and began to shout and swear towards Harjeet Kaur, who was working there. This placed Ms. Kaur in a state of fear and alarm, the Deputy Fiscal said, but a man in the shop managed to convince Gilhooly to leave. A short time later he came back to the takeaway and began banging his fist off the window outside while shouting, "Open the F, expletive deleted door, stupid." Ms. Kaur opened the door and Gilhooly went back inside where he began shouting and swearing. He picked up takeaway menus and began to throw them around the shop, before lifting up a table and throwing it, causing it to break. Gilhooly, from Shettleston, then started banging his hand on the countertop, shouting and swearing and calling Ms. Kaur a Turkish B, expletive deleted. When cops showed up, Gilhooly called them Orange B, expletive deleted. In a separate incident, around 1 PM on April the 23rd, Gilhooly was being apprehended by cops when he began to kick off. While being taken to Clydebank police station, he became aggressive and began to shout and make threats, using sectarian and homophobic language. He shouted, "Scumbag orange B, expletive deleted. When I see you in the street, I'll stab the F, expletive deleted, out of you." He added, "I'll follow you from Chester Street and fling acid in your face and kill your family." Sheriff Patricia Price said, "I don't think there's anybody he has managed to alienate in the community." His defence brief said, "It's a strange set of circumstances. He doesn't hold any grudges towards anybody, but his problem is drinking. He has been drinking since a young age. His drinking is at a level certainly unknown to me and a level unknown to most people." But the lawyer told the court Gilhooly is now motivated to try and address his drink problem. The sheriff pointed out that almost every single offence on Gilhooly's record is aggravated by sexual orientation or racial language. She added, "He has made some very serious threats to police officers." Sheriff Price said it was a very narrow decision not to jail him, but instead said she would see if you can stop your offending. Gilhooly was placed on a community payback order with 2 years supervision and the condition of attending alcohol counselling. He was given 270 hours of unpaid work and tagged for 150 days, keeping at home from 7 PM to 7 AM. That article was an exclusive by Catriona Stewart. From the Glasgow Times, Friday the 17th of June 2022, from the news section, "Plea for public to stop fly tipping on valuable land beside Glasgow Nursery," by Lauren Brownlee, senior reporter. Staff and children at a Glasgow nursery are pleading with members of the public to stop fly tipping on land beside the building. Pupils at Lamlash Nursery, based on Skerryville Road in the city's East End, asked Glasgow City Council to clear the nearby land, which was described as being a total rubbish tip. Fly tipping in the area had been an ongoing problem. Staff were keen to utilise the space and, after it had been cleaned up by council employees a few weeks ago, a sponsored walk was organised. Parents and carers sponsored their children to help raise funds to purchase equipment to be used in the green space. Marie Stephen, Child Development Officer and Forest School Leader, said, "We wanted to make good use of the space after it had been cleared. We're trying to make sure it can continue to be used for educational purposes rather than have people dump their rubbish there." The recent fundraising walk, which raised around £500, was Gruffalo themed. Marie added, "We linked it to our learning and put them in the Gruffalo characters along the path and bushes so the children could go and find them. We plan to keep using the area going forward and try to prevent people from fly tipping. We want it to be used for good purposes for the children's health and well-being, for their education, and to make it more resourceful. We will purchase equipment for children to use within the area. We already have some den building kits. Members of the public have refrained from dumping rubbish in the land since it was cleared, and the nursery children and the staff are keen for it to stay that way." Marie added, "It has stayed clear since, but we just don't want people to start dumping their rubbish there again. It's so valuable for the children to get out. Some of them stay in flats, so these areas, whilst they're in nursery, are so important to them. Stop dumping rubbish here. Think how purposeful it will be when it's been used for educational value." And that was an article by Lauren Brownlee. From the Glasgow Times, Friday the 17th of June 2022, from the news section, "Teen mum heartbroken after happy baby dies in her arms," exclusive by Kirsty Feerick. A teen mum has been left heartbroken after her happy baby died in her arms. Gypsy Marie Codona is devastated after losing her beautiful son, Mason Lee, last week. The 15-month-old suffered heart failure after having undergone 3 major open heart surgeries in his short life. Now his 19-year-old mum, who lives in Barrhead, has paid tribute to her baby who was full of life despite his health struggles. It comes after the tot was born with heart defects, lung problems, hyperinsulinism, transposition of the great arteries, and ventricular septal defect and pulmonary stenosis. It meant he spent months in hospital and cardiac wards, but still remained a smiley, happy tot. Gypsy Marie told the Glasgow Times he was always happy and full of life, even after all he had been through. He had 3 heart defects, transposition of the great arteries, ventricular septal defect, and pulmonary stenosis, and an underlying lung problem. Doctors were looking deeper in to see what exactly was wrong, but couldn't seem to find out. On May the 13th, they said there was nothing more they could do for him. They said it could be weeks or months before he passed, but it was 3 weeks after finding out that he then passed, peacefully and pain-free in my arms. A GoFundMe has now been set up to help the family pay for the tiny tot's funeral and to pay tribute to his memory. For more information, see the GoFundMe page online. And that article is an exclusive by Kirsty Feerick.
This article is from The National, date 17th June 2022, from the Politics section. Scottish independence offers hope in the face of Tory sleaze and grubbiness, by Lorna Slater. Tuesday told a story of 2 governments with 2 very different sets of priorities. Here in Scotland, the First Minister and my Green colleague Patrick Harvie presented our bold and ambitious plan to deliver an independence referendum and secure a progressive future for Scotland. It was a hopeful vision of a modern, democratic European nation that works for all of us and plays a positive role in the world. At the same time as we were launching the Positive Campaign for Independence and the first of several policy papers that will show how we get there, the UK government was doing something very different. It was engaged in a shameful court battle so that it could charter a flight of refugees to Rwanda without so much as a hearing. It was a cruel and authoritarian move that had already been condemned by lawyers, human rights campaigners and the United Nations. The people were being threatened with deportation who were only given 2 weeks' notice and told they could not appeal. This immoral and illegal flight was only stopped by a last-minute intervention from the European Court of Human Rights. There could be no clearer sign of how far our values diverge from those of Boris Johnson and his colleagues. While we were trying to open Scotland to the world, they were pulling out all the stops to deport vulnerable people. Any government that would even try to criminalise people who have fled persecution and would send them thousands of miles away to be processed is not one that I want to have any power over Scotland. The drive for a referendum comes at a crucial time for our country and our planet. Millions of people are struggling because of cuts, austerity and a cost of living crisis that has been exacerbated by decisions made in Downing Street. Every day I am contacted by people who are suffering. A lot of them feel abandoned and do not know how they're going to cope as the crisis worsens. Many have been hit by fuel poverty and the callous cuts to universal credit and other benefit payments. The Tories know the impact that their policies are having, but they simply don't care. They have shown the same disregard for our environment. Even as the world burns, they are approving plans for new oil and gas exploration in the North Sea. They are combining this with a so-called windfall tax on energy companies, which is nothing more than a tax break for polluters. Independence is not just about mitigating the disastrous choices of Boris Johnson and his terrible government. It's about democracy and giving us the levers of change and the powers to take a different path and ensure that the decisions impacting Scotland are made here in Scotland. It would allow us to make different and better political choices. It would give us the power to restructure our economy and use our vast renewable potential to work with our European neighbours to secure a net zero future. With Greens in government, we are using the powers we have to take climate action and do everything we can to tackle the cost of living crisis. In the last 9 months alone, we have doubled the Scottish Child Payment, introduced free bus travel for everyone under 22, and secured record funding for wildlife, nature, recycling and green travel. These have helped to empower people and provide some relief from the damage being done by Downing Street. With the full powers of independence, we can do even more to deliver the radical and transformative change that we so badly need. Scotland has 25% of Europe's total offshore renewable energy potential. If we are to do our part to avert the climate catastrophe, then we need to realise that potential and ensure a fair and just transition for our communities. But we cannot go the full way when we have one hand tied behind our back. As things stand, we don't have the power to upgrade our own electricity grid or to connect our vast renewable resources to our neighbours in continental Europe, so we can sell our excess zero-carbon energy. Similarly, we don't have the power to change VAT to make it cheaper to upgrade our homes and install heat pumps, or even the freedom to invest the public money that is needed for the infrastructure and industries of the future. Before I was elected to Parliament, I was an engineer working on the orbital turbine. During that time, I worked with people across Edinburgh, Dundee, Fife and Orkney. It was a great feat of engineering and a tribute to the skills that we have here in Scotland. Just imagine the impact if we could make 10 of them or 100. It could be part of a green industrial strategy that could create thousands of jobs in our factories and shipyards. Scotland's industry would boom and our planet would be the beneficiary. We have the skills and technology to do things differently, but we cannot make it happen as long as we are tied to a Westminster government that is more concerned with enriching its donors than it is with tackling the climate crisis. I was one of many people who was inspired by the 2014 referendum. It brought thousands of us together to explore our ideas and to debate and discuss the future that we wanted for Scotland. No person and no party owns independence. At heart, it is a question of democracy and ensuring that we all have a voice in building the country that we want it to be. That is why my colleagues and I will always take the time to sincerely listen and engage with people who are unsure or yet to be convinced by the case for independence. They are our friends, neighbours, family and colleagues, and will continue to be whatever happens. Our movement will be an inclusive one and that responds to their concerns. We know that independence will not make everything perfect. It's not an end in itself. Rather, it would be a new beginning. It would not solve all of Scotland's problems, but it would be a vital step on our journey towards a fairer, greener and better future. That article was by Lorna Slater.
Glasgow Times News on Monday the 20th of June. Glasgow man with incurable cancer cycles across Europe with a friend. An article written by Lauren Brownlee, senior reporter. A Glasgow man with incurable cancer cycled more than 570 kilometres across Europe to raise funds for charity. Earl Wilkie, who's 78, had been planning the trip with his friend Donald Christie for a few years, but it was postponed due to the pandemic. The trip was further delayed when Earl was diagnosed with esophageal cancer last November. Donald and Earl have been running and cycling together for almost 40 years. The pair completed the challenge last month and raised £2,472 for the Beatson Cancer Charity following their efforts during the 6-day trip. Earl said, "I did it because of the care which I got and am still getting because I'm incurable. I still get this 3-weekly drug called Herceptin. The care I had in the Beatson was second to none. It was wonderful, and of course they're doing fantastic research there too. I felt very strongly that I had to pay something back for the wonderful treatment that I've been given. One gets a huge buzz out of being able to do these things for charity. There's no better charity than the Beatson for myself. It does your own heart good to do some good. An article written by Lauren Brownlee. Glasgow Times News on Monday the 20th of June. Woman with dementia sent £47,000 energy bill. An exclusive front-page article written by Kirsty Fearick, senior reporter. An elderly mum with dementia has been sent a shared electricity bill of almost £50,000. Helen Nicholl has been hit with a £47,380 and 54p tab that she must split with more than 50 other flats at a retirement block in Crathes Court in Glasgow. The 90-year-old must also pay her own electric bill on top of her £911.18 share of the mammoth invoice sent by James Gibb Residential Factors to pay Brook Green Supply. This is to cover the cost of the building's lifts, communal lighting in corridors, door entry systems, communal heating and the communal lounge. The giant charge extends over 6 months of the shared electricity use between last October and this April. This comes as the country faces one of the worst economic crises since the 1970s, with household bills skyrocketing after a UK government decision to increase the energy price cap by a whopping 54%. Helen's furious daughter, Rona Nicholl, aged 62, is outraged over how the bill was delivered. She told the Glasgow Times, "The entire thing is appalling. My concern is the utter shock it will have on the elderly people who live there. I've not told my mum about it, as it would upset her, and she has dementia, so she would forget, but still be upset. It's a retirement block though, so other people in the building might not have family to help them. The price we've been sent is just unbelievable. It's never been anything like this before. It's come right out of the blue, so there's going to be so much anxiety and aggravation as a result of this. There are ways of managing this. You think they might have held a meeting or told us in a better way, but just sending an email or a letter just isn't right. I haven't paid the bill yet. I'm so annoyed by the way it's been dealt with no regard for the impact this will have on people. I'd like to know why this has been sent out with no explanation. I don't understand how they can just behave like this." James Gibb Residential Factors, which operates the factor costs of Crathes Court, has now apologised for its handling of the bill, but said it is regrettably part of a wider issue facing Scotland. It's now offering homeowners the option to pay their increased bills in instalments and welcomed individual discussions with residents about their financial situation. Nick Mayle, Executive Director for Operational Delivery at James Gibb, said, "We appreciate that such a substantial increase is worrying. We're extremely sorry for not handling the news in a more sensitive way, and we will listen carefully to the feedback from the collective homeowners of Crathes Court." This approach did not align with the process we have in place for this type of situation arising, which is to initially arrange a meeting of homeowners. We'll be contacting each homeowner individually to offer them the chance to discuss their financial situation and to outline the options available to them. Regrettably, the situation at Crathes Court is representative of a wider issue facing homeowners, tenants and landlords around Scotland. The wholesale price of electricity rocketed 5-fold last year, and these costs are only now starting to filter through to residents. When their most recent fixed energy deal expired, we immediately sought out the most competitive price available to alleviate the problem in the future. We've successfully halved their energy bills for the next 12 months and have offered all homeowners the opportunity to pay their bills in instalments. Organisations such as Citizens Advice Scotland say people are holding on by their fingertips following a surge in requests for advice. Derek Mitchell, Chief Executive of Citizens Advice Scotland, said, "We're facing a nightmare scenario in the spring as the rising costs of living and increases in energy bills collide with flat or falling incomes. Around 500,000 people are already cutting back on food shopping to deal with the unaffordable bills, and looking at the demand for advice the Citizens Advice Network saw during the pandemic, we see a link between the need to use a food bank and the need for advice around utilities. People are holding on by their fingertips. They can't afford a big rise in bills with no support. Some sort of emergency action from the government is essential." Brook Green Supply was contacted for comment. An exclusive front-page article written by Kirsty Fearick. Glasgow Times News on Monday the 20th of June. SEPA reveals cause of dead fish in Glasgow's Richmond Park Pond. An article written by Sarah Pacciaroni, multimedia journalist. An environmental agency has revealed the cause of thousands of fish mortalities in a pond in Glasgow's south side. We previously reported Oatlands resident Lisa Gillen had spotted the dead fish in Richmond Park during one of her daily walks this month. She had first noticed little white things on the surface of the main pond's water. She was left shocked when she realised the white specks were actually the bodies of thousands of fish floating in the water. Glasgow City Council has since warned visitors to the park not to touch the water due to a suspected blue-green algae infestation. Now, the Scottish Environment Protection Agency, or SEPA, has confirmed the infestation would be the cause behind the unusual event. A spokesperson said, when visiting the park, SEPA noticed a significant algal bloom in the pond. Officers believe a combination of factors, including algal growth, low dissolved oxygen due to algal respiration during the night, and a mass spawning event contributed to the deaths of the fish. Algal blooms in ponds can be caused by nutrient enrichment. SEPA is aware that the local authority plans to erect signage around the pond to discourage the public from feeding bread to ducks and suggest alternatives, which will also be better for the pond. SEPA has engaged with the local authority throughout this incident and will continue to do so as required. Glasgow City Council previously told the Glasgow Times crews had cleared the dead fish and waste, and a plan would be put in place to deal with the algae infestation. The local authority has also installed a warning notice at the pond reading, "High concentration of blue-green algae has been found in this water, which can cause serious health effects." The council is warning people not to swim or paddle in the water, fish and drink or touch the water and the scum around the pond. It's also advising to keep children and pets away from the water and the scum. If a person or animal is exposed to the water or the scum, it's advising them to wash with water immediately and seek medical advice. An article written by Sarah Pacciaroni. Glasgow Times News on Monday the 20th of June. UK house prices rise to record highs for a fifth month in a row. An article written by Joshua Searle, SEO journalist. House prices in the UK have hit record highs for a fifth month in a row. Across the country, the average asking price in June stands at £368,614, Rightmove said. Prices edged up by 0.3% or £1,113 on average month on month as the pace of price growth is slowing, the property website said. Despite a string of interest rate rises and the increasing cost of living, buyer demand for available properties remains very strong, it said. But it added that following a very strong first half of the year, it's likely that affordability constraints will have a greater influence on the market behaviour in the months ahead. This, alongside more choice coming onto the market for buyers and the usual seasonal variations, means that there are likely to be some month-on-month price falls during the second half of the year, Rightmove predicts. Tim Bannister, Rightmove's Director of Property Science, said, "Entering the second half of the year, we anticipate some further slowdown in the pace of price rises, particularly given the worsening affordability challenges that people are facing. We expect this to bring the annual rate of price growth down from the current 9.7% towards the 5% increase that Rightmove predicted at the beginning of the year." Rightmove said it currently takes around 150 days to complete a purchase on average after agreeing a sale, 50 days longer than at this time in 2019. There are more than 500,000 homes that are currently sold subject to contract, it added, which is 44% higher than it was at this time in 2019 and 39% higher than the pre-pandemic 5-year average. Rightmove's report was released as the EY Item Club said it expects UK house prices to rise 8% over the course of 2022, followed by a growth of 1.8% in 2023 and 1.2% in 2024. Peter Arnold, EY UK Chief Economist, said, "In previous economic cycles, a house price contraction would be on the cards, with incomes squeezed and a high chance of market correction after 2 years of outsized growth. Instead, house prices are set for a softer landing." Nitesh Patel, economist at Yorkshire Building Society, said demand for housing has far outstripped supply for years, but it's not just the quantity of houses we're lacking, it's the type and suitability of properties coming to market, be that new or existing homes. An article written by Joshua Searle. Glasgow Times News on Monday the 20th of June. Woman caught driving with no licence, just wanted to get out of the house. An article written by Katrina Stewart, columnist and reporter. A woman caught speeding in rush hour while driving without a valid licence said she just wanted to get out of the house. On March the 14th this year, around 4:40 p.m, police using a handheld speed camera caught Siobhan Kelly going above the limit on Great Western Road. Glasgow Sheriff Court was told this week that Miss Kelly was pulled over and police carried out checks on her. They found the 37-year-old was disqualified from driving, so her insurance was also not valid. She was taken to Clydebank Police Station where she was cautioned and charged. The Deputy Fiscal told the court Miss Kelly from Netherton had been doing 45 miles an hour on a 30 mile an hour stretch of road. Her defence brief said it was not the first time she'd been caught for driving offences. The lawyer said she just wanted to get out of the house and get away. He said she'd disobeyed the order of the court not to drive and had no excuse for it. He added, this is not like someone who gets on an electric scooter or electric bike and claims they didn't understand those were included in the ban. She knew she should not drive and she has realised the best thing to do is to get rid of the car. Sheriff Patricia Price said, I've read your criminal justice social work report and I appreciate you have difficulties. The sheriff noted Miss Kelly is already on a community payback order for another offence. Miss Kelly was sentenced to a further community payback order with 12-month supervision and was tagged, keeping her at home between 8 p.m. and 7 a.m. for 100 days. Miss Kelly must also pay a £140 fine and was disqualified from driving for 24 months. An article written by Katrina Stewart.
Evening Times, June 20. Lifestyle. Dance School of Scotland students prepare for showcase at Glasgow's tramway. Report by Sarah Campbell. A group of dance school students are getting ready to transport audiences from the south side of Glasgow to the vibrant streets of New York this month. As this year's end-of-year showcase, musical theatre students from the Dance School of Scotland will star in The World Goes Round, an ambitious new production staged by the Citizens Theatre. Graham Dickey, artistic director of musical theatre, said, "This year's show is unlike anything we've ever done before. It is based on the spirit of New York, which we have interpreted to mean its people rather than any building or street. The story takes place in Central Park and introduces the audience to a whole range of characters you might expect to meet there, some sad, some happy. The running theme throughout is no matter what is going on around you, the world will keep spinning. It's really quite exciting. People just won't expect it." The music from The World Goes Round comes from Kander and Ebb, the duo behind Broadway hits including Chicago and Cabaret. With around 30 songs in total, it is a huge undertaking for the dance school students, but one that they are ready to face head-on. Mr. Dickey said, "When we move from rehearsals to the tramway, it becomes a Citizens Theatre production. The only thing part of the production that's amateur is the students, because they're not getting paid. From the orchestra members to the lighting designer, these are some of the best professionals in Scotland. Once they get into the theatre, our students have to match that." As they make the move to the Paul Shields space for a final run of rehearsals, Mr. Dickey says that this year's showcase in particular holds a special significance for the students. He said, "We had our junior showcase earlier this month, and I had to ask the audience to forgive me for getting a bit emotional. As somebody who has been in the industry for 45 years, it is absolutely bizarre to have had 2 years of not being able to do anything. You suddenly realise just how much you miss it. The youngsters learn so much from that 1 week in the theatre, not just about their own skills, but about the discipline of that environment. I think they'll feel quite emotional when they walk into the tramway. We've still got a lot of work to do before the show, but I can't wait to see it. The Dance School of Scotland is based in Glasgow's Knightwood. The World Goes Round will run at the tramway from June 23 to 25. Report by Sarah Campbell. Evening Times, June 20. Opinion. Mike Daly points out why Scotland needs an emergency rent freeze. Housing costs continue to rise for homeowners and renters. Last week, the Bank of England increased its base lending rate from 1% to 1.25%. The base rate affects the pricing of residential mortgages and loans. This was a decision by the bank's Monetary Policy Committee, MPC. 6 members voted for a 0.25% increase, while 3 backed an increase to 1.5%. The base rate was only 0.1% until last December, when it was raised to 0.25%. The direction of travel is now sadly upwards, and that means more expensive loans. There are 11 million households in the UK with a mortgage. Consumer behaviour has changed since the financial crisis in 2008, with more homeowners taking out fixed-rate mortgages over a set period of time to avoid future price hikes. From the Financial Conduct Authority's data, 41.5% of mortgages in 2010 were fixed rate. By last year, that figure had climbed to 94%. UK Finance says the majority of people taking out a fixed rate do so on a 5-year basis, with others opting for a 2-year deal. This means if you have recently taken out a new 5-year fixed rate deal, you won't see any price increases until the end of your term. For those coming out of fixed rate deals, the price range and change will be significant. For example, a typical high street bank was offering fixed rate mortgage deals at 1.6% 2 years ago. Before last week, they were offering similar deals at 2.7 to 3%. The 2.7% re-mortgage came with a £1,000 product fee, while the 3% deal had no fee. From last week, the same bank is now offering fixed-rate deals of 3.14% with no fees. On a mortgage of £125,000, this represents a £90 increase per month in payments. A household with a tracker mortgage of £150,000 will have noticed a monthly increase in their mortgage of £83 from last year. Those on standard variable rate mortgages, the bank's default rate, will have noticed similar increases. Each month, between 70,000 to 80,000 people in the UK re-mortgage or take out a first mortgage. That's almost 1 million households each year. If you are due to take out a new mortgage, the safest option may be to opt for a 5-year fixed-rate deal on the basis many economists predict further base rate rises. You can generally lock into a new deal a few months before your existing deal is due to end. The Bank of England is tasked with trying to keep inflation at 2%. Unfortunately, inflation is now at 9% and is expected to rise above 10% when Ofgem increases its energy price cap in October. Increasing the base rate is an attempt to cool inflation by reducing people's disposable income. That may seem counterintuitive in a cost of living crisis when the pound in your pocket is now worth 90 pence and you haven't had a pay rise. Michael Saunders, a member of the Bank of England's MPC, said in a speech in May he did not expect inflation to fall to 2% for 3 years. It's going to get worse before it gets better. While Scotland cannot do much about UK monetary policy or the external drivers of inflation, we can do something about the plight of private renters. According to CityLets, average rents in Scotland in the private rented sector, the PRS, increased by 8.5% year on year. In Edinburgh, average rents rose more than 14% annually, reaching £1,214 per month, while Glasgow had increases of 16%, with rents of £972. Dundee's rents were £722, with a 12.5% year-on-year increase. The number of private tenants living in poverty has increased by 75% over the past decade, according to Scottish Government statistics. Data for 2014 to 2017 shows that 280,000 people were living in relative poverty in the PRS, that's the private rented sector. The number of private renters in severe poverty after housing costs rose by 2/3 in the same period. The solution for Scottish Labour MSP Mercedes Villarbe is an emergency interim rent freeze. In the last year alone, average monthly rents in Scotland increased by over 8%. Since then, double-digit inflation has hit. We must be clear about what we are facing. This is a cost of living emergency, and it requires emergency action. That is why I am calling for an emergency rent freeze to be brought in through the COVID recovery legislation this month, because those on the lowest incomes did not cause the current crisis. And if our recovery is to be fair, we cannot allow the poorest to be made to pay for it. Freezing rent will save tenants money, combat inflation, and have an immediate impact on the cost of living. Scottish ministers have this power. I am calling on them to use it. Report by Mike Daly.
From the Glasgow Times, Wednesday the 22nd of June 2022. From the news section, do you qualify for a £105 gift card to spend in Glasgow from the council? By Stuart Patterson. Almost £9 million of gift cards have been sent to low-income households in Glasgow next month. The cards, worth £105 each, will be giving out to 85,000 people across the city to help with the cost of living. The cards can be used in 700 shops and businesses in Glasgow, registered with the Scotland Loves Local scheme. It is hoped the cards will help with household budgets and give the local economy a boost. The total value of the cards is £8.85 million, coming from the Scottish Government £80 million COVID Recovery Fund. Cards will be sent automatically to those who are eligible, and people do not need to apply. The council will use council tax data to identify low-income households who qualify for a council tax reduction, who will then be issued with one of the gift cards. Councillors approved the scheme today. Susan Aitken, leader of Glasgow City Council, said, "The gift cards will give city businesses a much-needed lift following 2 years of the pandemic and the resulting impact on trade. but they also allow us to support tens of thousands of low-income households and individuals with practical assistance, something we can hope to can make a positive difference to them during the worst cost of living crisis in decades. While the number of businesses signed up to the scheme continues to grow, we're still encouraging as many as possible, especially small and medium-sized companies, to sign up. We want local high streets across every one of the Glasgow's communities to benefit from this measure. And that piece was by Stuart Patterson. From the Glasgow Times, Wednesday the 22nd of June 2022, from the news section, ex-children's reporter boss placed on sex offenders register for assaults on colleagues. By Connor Gordon, court reporter. A former manager at the Scottish Children's Reporter, who indecently assaulted 2 female colleagues, has been placed on the sex offenders register. David Jones struck at work social events, with one victim stating he also sent her porn via email. The same woman described him as a pathetic excuse of a man. Jones, a married grandad with degrees in law and philosophy, is now retired after 32 years with the service, which often deals with troubled and vulnerable youngsters. The 71-year-old first offender denied the crimes during a trial at Glasgow Sheriff Court, insisting he had no idea why the woman made the accusations. However, he was found guilty of indecently assaulting both women and communicating indecently with one by Sheriff Simone Sweeney. The charges span between August 2007 and May 2009, occurring in Hamilton, Lanarkshire. Jones was placed under supervision for 12 months and put on the sex offenders register for a period of time that will later be specified to him. The sheriff also ordered Jones to attend alcohol counselling and granted a non-harassment order restricting his contact with the victims for 12 months. Sheriff Sweeney said, "I've considered all that I've read and heard and have taken account of an absence of a criminal record. I am satisfied that there is an alternative to a custodial sentence." The court earlier heard that one of the women, now aged 52, said Jones molested her after initially thinking he was going to ask her to dance. She said he used a lot of pressure and that she held his arms to try and stop him. The witness added, "I did not want him to put his hands on my legs. I did not like it. He put his hands further up and he was laughing." The second woman eventually kicked Jones between the legs. This victim admitted she did not initially report Jones, stating to the court, "He was my boss. I was embarrassed." At another works party at Glasgow's Princes Square, the woman claimed Jones struck again as he got into a taxi. She recalled, "He hit me very hard between the legs. I assumed with his hand. I got such a fright, it was painful that I hit him in the chest and told him to F*** off." Jones was said to have laughed in her face, hysterically. The woman was so upset she asked her husband to collect her instead. The court was shown numerous emails said to have been Jones sending pornography with inappropriate messages. The woman replied at one stage to him, "You are a pathetic excuse of a man. I will not hesitate to report you to the police. Do not contact me ever again." Jones stated, "Sorry, did not mean to offend. Will not be in touch ever again." The woman said she was angry at the intrusion of getting porn videos from an ex-boss. She initially went to another manager before going to police, sparking a probe. It then emerged a now 59-year-old woman had also been targeted by Jones at an office bash in Hamilton in 2007. He had stroked her legs up towards her thighs and crotch, despite her warning him to get off. Sleazy Jones claimed he wanted to S***G his colleague. He then tried to laugh it off and continued chatting as if nothing had happened, adding he ought to grow up. The traumatised woman described how the uncomfortable and horrendous sex attack felt like it lasted forever. She told the trial, "I have got a great recollection of what happened in that office. When you say no, it should mean no." Jones, also of Hamilton, told how colleagues he worked with were almost like a family sometimes. He denied the attacks, insisting one of the women he had only light-heartedly conversations and banter. Jones said, "I do not know why they would say that. I do not know why their recollection is not the same as mine." In her closing speech, Prosecutor Jenny Reid said Jones was guilty of a sustained course of conduct by a man in a managerial position against women he worked with. Paul Sweeney, defending, told the sentencing that the dad of four continues to deny wrongdoing. The lawyer added, "He is a well-educated man. He went to the Gregorian University in Rome, achieving a degree in philosophy, and did a law degree in Scotland, graduating in 1979. He was then employed by the Children's Reporter, where he was thought of by colleagues he worked with and trained. He is someone who has dedicated his life to make that organisation better." And that piece was by Connor Gordon. From the Glasgow Times, Wednesday the 22nd of June 2022, from the news section: "Driver sped through red light and crashed into car with 1-year-old passenger." By Connor Gordon, court reporter. A first offender who crashed into a car which contained a 1-year-old boy has been tagged. Dylan Monteith, 23, tried to beat a red light before colliding into George Johnson and Jana Kanivinsky's vehicle, causing it to spin in Glasgow's Pollock on April the 7th, 2020. Both vehicles were left damaged, but fortunately all involved escaped unhurt, including the young boy. Today, Monteith pled guilty at the Glasgow Sheriff Court to dangerous driving. He also admitted possession of an extendable baton. Sheriff Matthew Jackson QC ordered Monteith, of Pollock, to undertake 200 hours of unpaid work and tagged him for 3 months, keeping him indoors between 7 p.m. and 7 a.m. The court heard Monteith was behind the wheel of a Toyota Aygo. Prosecutor Jennifer McKee said, "Ms. Kanivinsky and Mr. Johnson had their 1-year-old son as a passenger in the vehicle. Monteith exited Priest Hill Road at speed and failed to comply with a red light. He crossed the reservation in place, collided with Mr. Johnson's vehicle, causing it to spin and come to a stop on the central reservation. All exited their vehicles, to which Monteith approached to say, 'I'm sorry, I had to burst that red light.' A 999 call was made, and fortunately there were no injuries. Monteith's vehicle was found to have damage to the front, while the other car had front and offside damage. Monteith's vehicle was also searched, and the extendable baton was found before he was arrested." And that article is by Connor Gordon. From the Glasgow Times, Wednesday the 22nd of June 2022, from the news section: 3 men arrested after Denniston break-in. Report by Esther Tarnay. 3 men were arrested following a break-in in Glasgow's Denniston. Police officers were called to a property on Alexander Parade around 1:30 a.m. this morning, following reports of the incident. The men, aged 43, 38 and 24, have been arrested and charged in connection with the break-in. A report will be submitted to the Procurator Fiscal. A Police Scotland spokesperson said, "Officers were called to reports of a break-in at a premises on Alexander Parade, Glasgow, around 1:30 a.m. on Wednesday, June the 22nd, 2022. 3 men, aged 43, 38 and 24, have been arrested and charged with connection with the incident. A report will be submitted to the Procurator Fiscal." And that report was by Esther Tarnay.
Evening Times, June 22. Opinion. Nicola Sturgeon says, "It is time to make Scotland wealthier and fairer." At the start of last week, the Scottish Government published the first in a series of papers, Building a New Scotland, that will make afresh the case for Scotland becoming an independent country. It will present a positive, upbeat and optimistic case, and it will address tough questions head-on. Today, Scotland, like countries across the world, face significant challenges. We need to recover and rebuild from what has been the worst pandemic in more than a century. In addition to that, all nations have an obligation to reduce greenhouse gas emissions to tackle climate change, while also working to raise our collective well-being. And we are confronting those challenges at a time when inflation is at the highest level in more than a generation. Inflation which, as a result of Brexit, is higher in the UK than in any other G7 country, and which is plunging individuals, families and businesses into an acute cost of living crisis. These challenges must be addressed, but we should remember that alongside them, Scotland also has huge advantages and immense potential. Independence in itself does not guarantee success for any country. For Scotland, the aspiration of a wealthier, fairer, and more successful country will depend on democratic decisions made by elected governments post-independence. But the point is that in independent Scotland, crucial decision-making power will rest with the people who live here, not with Westminster governments that do not command the support of people in Scotland, and which pursue policies like Brexit, which are deeply damaging to Scotland's interests. Of course, any case for change must begin with an analysis of the status quo. That indeed is the purpose of the paper we published last week. It looks in detail at 10 countries across Europe, all with different characteristics, but most of them with similarities to Scotland, and all of them independent. The evidence is overwhelming. These countries are wealthier, fairer, and more productive than the UK. The conclusion is stark and inescapable. Compared to these countries, many of which are smaller or similarly sized to us, and most of them with nowhere near the natural resources we are blessed with, Scotland, as part of the Westminster system, is being held back. This analysis shows beyond doubt that independent countries of Scotland's size do better. And if they can and do perform better, why not Scotland? With independence, we too would have the levers and the autonomy that these countries take for granted to help fulfill their potential. Independence will put the powers that determine success into our own hands. It will mean we can work in partnership with our friends in the rest of the UK, but not be subject to decisions of Westminster governments we do not vote for, and which are taking us in the wrong direction. It will give us the ability, just like these other countries, to fulfill the vast potential we have and build the wealthier, fairer, happier country we know is possible. I was re-elected as First Minister just over 1 year ago on a clear manifesto commitment to give the people of Scotland the choice of becoming an independent country. And the people of Scotland elected a Scottish Parliament with a decisive majority in favour of both independence and the right to choose that future in a referendum. The Scottish Parliament, therefore, has an indisputable democratic mandate for an independence referendum. However, the Tories and Labour have so far completely failed to engage with that point. Firstly, because they know it is true, and secondly, because they can see how threadbare the case for continued Westminster governance of Scotland has become. But no matter how hard the Westminster parties try and run away from the substantive debate on independence, they cannot dodge reality. The people of Scotland have secured a democratic mandate to decide their own future, and neither Boris Johnson nor any other UK Prime Minister has the right to block that choice. After everything that has happened, Brexit, COVID, Boris Johnson, I firmly believe that it is time to set out a different and better vision for our country. Holding a referendum, of course, does not mean that Scotland will automatically become independent. That will be a choice for the people of Scotland. The task for those of us who support independence is to persuade people of the case and the arguments for independence, and that is what the SNP intends to do in the months ahead. So many of the challenges we face right now are being exacerbated because we are not independent. Independence is not a distraction from these issues. It is an alternative. It is about better equipping ourselves to navigate the challenges and fulfill our vast potential. So it is time now to start talking about making Scotland wealthier and fairer. With the campaign for independence beginning afresh and in earnest, we will continue to set out in detail how we can make the transition to independence and how we can better navigate and overcome the challenges we all face to build a better country for everyone who lives here, says Nicola Sturgeon. Evening Times, June 22. Lifestyle Memories. Hitler got us a house in Possil. Glasgow man's memories of terrifying night Maryhill was bombed. Report by Anne Fotheringham. On Kilmun Street in Maryhill, Bobby Dinney lived in a tenement flat, 2 rooms and a kitchen, with his dad Jock, who was a chimney sweep, his mum Betty, and his brothers and sisters George, Jim, Hugh and Agnes. When war was declared in 1939, life changed for the family, as it did for people all over the city and beyond. Gas mask training and air raid drills became part of everyday life. Recalls Bobby, who is now 89. The school bell would ring, and we had to put on our gas masks very quickly and get to the floor. At night, in our houses, we had to keep windows covered, street lights were dimmed. I remember my mum putting sticky tape crisscrosses over the window in case of blasts. On the night of March 13, 1941, the moon was very bright over Glasgow, and when the air raid sirens sounded, the Dinney family's neighbours, John and Ellen Geddes, came into the house. This was a common occurrence. Families in the street were used to the wailing sirens and the fear of what might follow. That night, however, Betty Dinney could not settle. Recalls Bobby. She had a feeling something was going to happen. She told us all to keep our clothes on when we went to bed and make sure we all stayed together. John and Ellen came in, but John got fed up waiting and went home. I remember him saying, nothing is happening as usual. I'm away up the road. Just a few minutes later, the bomb hit. John was killed instantly in the explosion, which destroyed Kilmun Street and much of the surrounding area. More than 80 people died in the bombing on Kilmun Street that night, with a further 180 injured. Hundreds of homes were destroyed. The sustained attack by the Luftwaffe over the nights of March 13 and 14, 1941, which also killed hundreds of people in Clydebank, better known as the Clydebank Blitz. Says Bobby, the day before, men had come to our building to install iron posts in the close, crisscross, right up to the ceiling. I think those posts saved our lives that night by stopping the whole building from collapsing. All I remember was a terrible thud, and everything went black. Our living room door was blown off. My mum got us all out of bed and made us crawl through the hole in the door to get out. We went up to the football pitches. Then the police came and took us to a school where we stayed in makeshift accommodation for a month. Throughout it all, my mother was brilliant. There is an incredible footnote to this story, says Bobby. My brother George was 12 at the time, and when everyone fled, he stayed with our Aunt Margaret, who was blind. She was stunned after the explosion, nearly buried in the debris. Guided only by her groans, he found her in the rubble and stood beside her at the close mouth until she had enough strength to walk. Then they walked half a mile to the nearest rest centre to get help. Margaret pleaded with her young nephew to leave her and get to safety, but he refused. Says Bobby, he was recommended for the George Medal, but nothing ever came of it, which is a shame. Bobby's other brother Jim was at the dancing that night. He was in Sandbank Street and heard the drones and whistling of dropping bombs, recalls Bobby. He had to hide and took shelter in a coal cellar. Then, as soon as the all clear sounded, he ran back to Kilmun Street, where he got the shock of his life. His house had been destroyed. Eventually, the Dinny family, like many others, were rehoused. Says Bobby with a smile, Hitler got us a house in Possil, and I've lived here to this day. Bobby's memories of life in Maryhill and Possil, and his time as Glasgow's most famous football scout, have been turned into a book. The Scout, the Bobby Dinny story, is available on Amazon. Report by Anne Fotheringham.
And that was this week's Glasgow Times News podcast, normally recorded in our studio at the Bishopbriggs Media Centre, currently recorded from our volunteers' homes with the publisher's kind permission. Thanks for listening.